called Resources for Interpreters. This is our gift, the gift of cross-cultural communications to you, the interpreters, our community. CCC, if you're new to CCC, is the only national US, now I know you're international crowd, the US National Training Agency for community interpreting and medical interpreting. We also are the only dedicated book publisher. This will be very relevant to the current webinar for interpreter training, textbooks and manuals and workbooks. And we have more than 400 licensed trainers now in 43 US states, DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, and six other countries. Our books are sold to 30 countries and all 50 US states. This webinar series, I was just telling our incredible 3 panelists that we have been doing this since April 2020. Yeah. And we have we've done 23 webinars so far in this free series, free to you, the interpreters, for a total of almost 15,000 before today. And today I'm proud to report there's almost 1,200 registered just for this webinar. And so I am, for those of you who don't know me, Marjorie Bancroft, the founder and director of Cross-Cultural Communications. Our 3 esteemed panelists, Danielle and Sarah and Rosia, will introduce themselves. They are, I hesitate to call them veterans in the industry because that makes some people feel old. They are clearly not old, but they really are senior in the sense of incredible wealth of experience. And why are they talking about this topic that is so dear to my heart? Why are so many people attending it? Because I think it's because interpreters are hungry for this information that you're about to get. So often interpreters work alone, isolated, knowing that they want to improve, knowing that they need this thing called reflective practice, this professional development piece, not always sure how to get it. If they do get feedback, it may be from supervisors who do or don't really understand the context that they're working in. They may think of feedback as something like a stick that's being beaten over their head, whereas in fact, I say this again and again, we learn, I think, more from building on our strengths than attacking our weaknesses. Yes, we need to address our weaknesses, but building on our strengths is capital. Today, you will be introduced to a tool that has been developed precisely by these 3 presenters that has me in awe and gratefulness to them for their gift to the profession itself. I am going to leave you in their very capable hands. I will come back near the end to ask them your questions. Please use Q&A for questions. Please use chat to say hi and for any questions for CCC. Questions for panelists, I will come back and ask. Please note that when you enter chat, you need to change the setting if you want to speak to everyone, because the default setting is for panelists. Yes, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint 24 hours from now. Yes, you will get a link to your certificate also in 24 hours and a link to this recording, which is free, and anybody will also be able to access the recording. Truly a huge gift. Without further ado, Danielle, Sarah, Rasul, have fun, and I will be listening to every word.
Thank you, Marjorie. And thank you. We are, first of all, so honored and grateful to be here, and that Cross-Cultural Communications and Marjorie has given us the platform and the soapbox for us to stand on and talk about something that is so near and dear to all 3 of our hearts. So I'm going to kick it off. And first of all, I've been watching the chat. Happy or hello from the future or to the future. We've got so many folks here from Australia, and someone put in there, it's actually January 20th. So tell me what the future's like. Is coronavirus still a thing? Is it gone yet? So we're just so happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen and we are going to kick off. So just give me a quick second here and we'll get into full screen and we'll get started. So wonderful. So we're here today under the premise of the remote interpreter and how to use a self-evaluation tool for independent and peer-supported reflection. Lots of words there, but essentially, as Marjorie said, we're here to help you work through your practice as a remote interpreter, which we know can be very siloed. And so we're hoping at the end of today to give you a taste of what this self-evaluation looks like and how you can use it on your own and in a peer supported environment. And we will be modeling and demonstrating that for you as well today too. So we are your presenters. My name is Danielle Meter. I'm a nationally certified American Sign Language interpreter. I'm a licensed TCII trainer that is through Cross-Cultural Communications. And I have been an interpreter for 15 plus years, with 90% of my work being in a remote environment. And I'll pass it over to, I have next in line is on my screen is Sarah. So I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Sarah Stockler-Rex. I am a certified Spanish interpreter. I have over 10 years experience as an interpreter, started on-site and then transitioned to remote work. Most of my work is remote VRI, and recently completed my master's in applied linguistics, actually through the University of Melbourne online. So hello to all the people from Australia joining us today.
Fabulous.
Very exciting. I am Rocio Trevino. I am also a nationally certified healthcare Spanish interpreter. I have 10 years experience doing OPI, VRI, and on-site interpretation as well. And I am also a licensed TCII trainer through Cross-Cultural. I'm very happy to be here. So excited.
Awesome. So there you have it. We are very passionate about what we're about to talk to you about, and the fact that we only have an hour. We're gonna cram in as much as we can, and we put a lot of detail into the PowerPoint so that you can use it in real life a bit after this webinar too. Before we get started, we'd like to talk about our objectives and our assumptions. So the objectives today, we know the title, you've read the description, but I just like to ground us in what we're here to talk about today. We're going to define communicative autonomy, and I'll explain why that's so important to what we're about to talk about. We're going to understand the value and importance of self-evaluation. This is a practice profession, which means we can always get better. We're going to introduce the self-evaluation tool, and then we'll model that for you. But I also like to talk about some assumptions. We know every interpreting session, whether on-site or remote, is different, which means everything we're about to talk about today may not happen in every single encounter you interpret. So just keep that in mind. So well, what if it doesn't happen? I've answered that question for you already. It may not actually apply in this tool in this moment. All language pairs can use this tool. We've made this language neutral, and we want peer support to be language neutral. This tool will not be talking about the word choices you made in your interpretation, the linguistics aspect of your interpretation, but really the skills and protocols, the things you do to manage the encounter, the session, to be successful. And like I said, anyone can support their peer. This is not something that you have to do alone, or only the best of the best can help you. We really want this to be something that everyone can leverage. So just to kind of level set our expectations for today. So the first thing I said we were going to talk about is communicative autonomy. And we have this nice visual here of a flower, and a flower is going to grow if we have all the components that lead up to it. So communicative autonomy really is everyone's ability to say what they want, when they want, how they want. And we all want that. That transcends identity and groups. That transcends me as an interpreter, and you as a participant, and you as the provider. All of us want that option, an ability to say what we want, how we want, when we want. And a language barrier should not change that dynamic, which means every decision we make matters, because it will influence our ability to help and support and uphold communicative autonomy as an interpreter. So as we make those decisions, you have to evaluate, am I helping everyone's communicative autonomy, or am I hindering it? And that communicative autonomy is really key for everyone being able to get what they want, right? The job of an interpreter is not to make sure everybody gets what they want out at the end of it, and we have a nice resolved solution and outcome. Our job is to uphold communicative autonomy so that authentic communication can happen. Everyone can say what they want and how they want, and however the communication sorts itself out is on the participants. My job as the interpreter is to make sure they all got to say what they want, how they want, when they wanted, through my voice as the interpreter, without getting in the way. And the other piece we'll talk about too is that we're more than just facilitating communication. That makes it sound too easy. We know how hard our job is. Interpreters make hundreds of decisions in a session, dozens in a second, and every decision we make will impact communicative autonomy. So we don't want to sell ourselves short. Oh, I'm just an interpreter, I facilitate communication. No, we do so much more than that. So the self-evaluation tool will really represent that we do so much more than just facilitate communication. So we need to be aware and reflect on our work and our performance so that we can ensure everyone's communicative autonomy. And that really is the goal of the tool that we're going to talk about. It's not just to facilitate communication or to help one person over another or to prioritize one person over another. It really is to make sure that when we reflect on our work, the ultimate goal of communicative autonomy has been upheld. And I think now I've said communicative autonomy probably 15 times. So if you were counting and I owed you $1 for how many times I said communicative autonomy, you're pretty rich right now. And this is not our term. This is from one of the authors of the Community Interpreter International, Sophia. I never say her last name correctly, but she is a rock star because she really coined this term to talk about the work we do and to really help me as a sign language interpreter put into words what we do and just how important our work is. So I'm always grateful to her for that. So we have communicative autonomy and self-evaluation. They have to be worked together. You can't have one without the other. And so I'm hoping this slide, as you reflect on it in the future and after this, and as we've talked about here, even just briefly, you understand every decision you make affects everyone's ability to express themselves. And so you have to be reflective and evaluate your performance. But that said, what are you looking for? If you ask yourself, well, when I look back on my work, yeah, sure, it went great, or no, it didn't. You need to have targeted things to evaluate. And that is what Rocio is going to cover for us.
Thank you. So what is this tool, right? What are we talking about? It's something that did not come together overnight, right? This is something that was worked on, that has been tweaked, and we considered all industry best practices, keep all of that in mind. And even now, as it is, we know it's not something that's static. It's not going to stay this way forever. This is something just like as we as interpreters, we are in a practice profession, and that is something that is also going to evolve. As Danielle mentioned, you will notice that these are all skills that you can analyze and talk about with another interpreter, regardless of what language you speak. You do not have to speak the same language to give a peer interpreter some feedback. And right now, as we look at it, because we could talk about each one of these things in an abundance of detail and take forever. But what you're seeing right now is the big picture, right? And think about this as one of those pictures, and they probably have a name, I don't know what it is. One of those pictures, so from afar, it looks like it's a picture of Homer Simpson. And then if you get really close, you see a bunch of little pictures of Homer Simpson eating a donut or doing whatever. And it's made up of all those little pictures, right? And that's the same thing here. We're looking at the big picture. We're going to get into a little bit of detail, look at a couple of those little pictures, but there's no way we can cover them all. And just think about that as we go through this. So what we are doing is talking about these 4 domains. We're starting and completing sessions, session engagement and technology management, strategic mediation and communicative autonomy, and participant education and communication. I'm sure that all of the interpreters that are listening right now have already thought of several scenarios, several situations that they've been in, encounters that they've recently had, and how they would apply or how they would possibly reflect on those in each one of these different subdomains. And that's what we're going to talk about. And that's what we're excited for, right? We're excited to provide you with a tool that will let you reflect on your own work, ask yourselves the questions about your performance after you've had an encounter that you might find difficult or just a regular run of the mill and nothing exciting happened. Is there anything I could have done differently? Would I, if I could do it all over again? So it's just about having that conversation about our work. As Danielle mentioned, we have millions of choices that we make as interpreters. Encounter after encounter, there's not one encounter where you don't, as an interpreter, make a choice, whether it's to intervene or not, or whether it's to speak up about something or not. So we just want to give you this tool so that you can all talk about it, discuss amongst yourselves, discuss with others. Hopefully, you have, and we'll talk about having your village too. Hopefully you have other interpreters that you do have the opportunity to talk about this with, but even if you don't, you can use this for self-evaluation. So that's what I had to talk about here. I know Sarah's now going to walk us through the ratings. So Sarah.
Yes, thank you. I love the Homer Simpson example. That's excellent.
Yeah, that was great. I had not heard that before, so bravo.
Thank you.
So with this self-evaluation tool that Rocio just gave us an excellent overview of, we have a 3-tiered rating scale that you'll be using to assess your own performance, or if you use it with a peer, you'll use this to kind of guide the discussion of the performance, right? So as you can see, we have 3 levels. The 3 is the top. The 3 is what we're aiming for in our performance. So it means that you make decisions that consistently uphold your standards of practice, right? No matter what specialization you're in, and you effectively support the flow of communication and that keyword we keep saying, communicative autonomy. So you'll notice some key words in here, and this is what helps me kind of focus on the meat of it, because it's a lot of text, right? And even with the domains, we have a version of these 3 ratings with each specific subdomain with some specific language on what that means in each area. But really you want to focus on the language of consistently, uphold, effectively, communicative autonomy, right? So you'll notice that in the lower levels, number 2 doesn't mean you did a bad job per se, but it means you were inconsistent. It means that you weren't completely effective as you would be with a 3. And number 1 is pretty much unable to, or you negatively impacted the flow of communication. As we keep mentioning, this is a practice profession. So this is something that's happened to all of us, I'm sure. But this is really going to help you reflect on your own performance to be able to look at this language and say, where do I fall realistically? And be honest with yourself too. Mm-hmm. These ratings, I should mention, are loosely based on the ILR scale, so the Interagency Language Roundtable that was developed by the US government for language testing in different areas, interpreting being one of them. So think of 1 as your minimal performance, 2 is a limited working performance, so limited being that key word, and 3 is a professional performance. And that's where we want to aim for all of the domains. But you may find that in some domains you are a 3, in some domains you have a little work to do. You're going to identify your weaknesses or the areas where you can really make your performance, take it to that next level. And it may change from session to session depending on various factors too, right? Because we know each session is different and there's going to be different challenges with each. So with that, I think we can get into the first domain.
Yeah. Oh, I do this every time. I mouse forward and back the way it's just, I promise I'll someday get it. All right, here we go.
No worries. Okay, so the first domain we're going to talk about is starting and completing sessions. No matter what specialization you interpret in, this is going to apply to your sessions, right? So if you work in an on-demand setting and callers are calling up for you, you're an OPI, or maybe you're in VRI, you do your standard greeting, you let them know you're there, you introduce yourself as the interpreter, give your language pair, your ID, things like that. Or in other settings too, you know, you have to open the floor and let the participants know who you are, you're there to interpret, and this should be done with all parties. So you're going to hear this in 2 different languages, right? So you're gonna have your introduction prepared in your working languages, and you should give that complete introduction every time. There may be situations where it's an emergency and you have to give a really short version or just jump into it. But really most sessions will have time for that complete introduction, and you can take that opportunity to educate the participants. So what does that look like? Highlighting what's important to you, setting some ground rules on working with interpreters, getting everything kind of settled beforehand, making sure everything's positioned well. As a remote interpreter, you can hear what you need to hear, you can see what you need to see. Now, at the conclusion of the session, we should also close with all parties. So same thing as the greeting, it's reflected in your closing, and ensure that that conclusion is actually there, right? So make sure that the interpreter services are no longer needed before you disconnect that call. Even if they can call back, it's best to make sure they have that consistency of service with you for the whole session while they need it. And during this whole time, right, you're speaking as yourself in your own voice as the interpreter. We know that during the interpretation, you're reflecting the register, tone, and style of the original speaker. But when you give your introduction and your closing, you're speaking in your own voice. So that voice should be a professional tone and an engaging attitude, just as we see here in this subdomain. I made a little note here too to read the room, because I think a common misconception, especially maybe for newer interpreters, is that an engaging attitude might sound like really chipper, bubbly, good customer service all of the time, right? And that's not necessarily the case. So you have to read the room. If you don't know what you're walking into as a remote interpreter, which is sometimes the case, there might be a really somber tone. If you interpret in healthcare and you come into that session and you can tell the lights are down low, you know, people are talking in hushed tones, you pick up on the fact that it's an end of life conversation or a stillborn baby or something like that, then you're going to adjust your tone. You're still going to be engaged and professional, but you're going to adjust that tone according to what's happening in your session. Okay, so that's some examples of what this domain might look like in a given session.
Fabulous. And I did see one question that came in, if we can actually add it now. Gladys Dennis had said, I have confusion about my introduction myself each time, and if I have to do it or not, because sometimes in a virtual appointment, you have a short amount of time. And as Sarah said, that'll happen. You may be in a situation where you just got to go, but sometimes they've been conditioned to just kind of steamroll over the interpreter and not give you the space. Remember, we're professionals and we know the value and importance of our work, and we're not in the shadows. We are not invisible. I think I've said this before. Interpreters who think they have to be invisible, come out of the shadows, please, and stop being invisible. We're here. So if you are feeling like you're being rushed because it is a very life or death or very urgent situation, awesome. That, like, go with that. Read the room, as Sarah just said. But other times, take up space. You are there for a reason. Take up your space and give your introduction and set the tone and let everybody know what they should expect from you in that encounter. All right, are we ready? I did it again.
Thank you.
Oh
We did it again.
I know.
So we are moving on though to talk about session engagement and technology management. And so again, just situations where this might apply during difficult sessions. What are you as the interpreter doing? So I know immediately interpreters are going to be like, well, there's kids crying in the background, there's static on the line, there's a number of difficulties that we face day in and day out, on top of the, you know, eliminating all the language, not just, that's something I don't know what that is. Eliminating all of that, just what's actually happening on the call and how you handle those situations. Are you remaining calm? Are you using the appropriate strategies if you do need to intervene? And we will talk about that a little bit more as well, but making sure that you, the interpreter, are not adding to the intensity of whatever is going on, that you're not also getting frustrated with that child that won't stop crying because they've been sick for weeks, right? All of that, and making sure that you stay completely just calm, keeping your own emotions in check. As far as remaining completely engaged and focused during the session. This, I think, happens a lot with interpreters who, as Danielle is doing right now, will be distracted by their phone, or let's say the LEP participant suddenly decides that they can answer a couple questions for themselves, right? So they've now answered for themselves. Now you as the interpreter, are you going to be like, okay, they're good. I'm going to start looking out the window and seeing what else is going on and be distracted until you hear the interpreter, are you there? And then you're refocused again, right? We should remain focused. We should still be, even though they're communicating, we're gonna let that happen, but we're still gonna be engaged. We're still gonna be taking our notes so that if we do need to step back in, we're able to do so flawlessly without having to ask for repetition because we got distracted by something else. And remaining completely focused throughout, beginning to end. Working in a secure environment, I think, is a little bit more standard practice now with everyone working remote, making sure that you're in a room with a door, with a lock, and making sure that you are alone inside the room, right? Not with your child or watching anyone else or doing anything else. Just being completely on your own, focused on your work and avoiding any of those additional possible distractions. On top of the fact that we have HIPAA to consider and all of that, it's just good for our profession. We establish ourselves as professional interpreters. When I am here, when I am being your interpreter, I am a professional interpreter. I'm not trying to rush and do my dishes at the same time because that would be unprofessional, right? So we're just keeping all of that into consideration, thinking about not just ourselves, this one encounter, but the big picture as well of our profession of interpreting, and making sure that we're elevating that profession with each of our decisions that we make. I think that that's kind of the best way to sum this up, right? Staying professional, staying true to what we are as interpreters, and making sure that we do stick with that. And the next one, we're gonna, if you'll go next, Danielle, we're gonna talk about the role, right? Knowing that role. As the interpreter, I'm not invisible, as Danielle has just said, right? We're not invisible. We are in the room for a reason. We are on that call for a reason. And that's because we are needed as interpreters. And when we need to step outside of our role, when we are needed for something else, for clarifying something, for asking for that repetition, for anything else that we need, right? We need to be very clear. This is the interpreter speaking is something that comes out of probably most of the interpreters' lips millions of times a day. Anytime you have to ask for repetition, for clarification, for removing the speakerphone, for whatever it might be, right? Whatever you need as the interpreter. There is no one else in the room on the line that is going to ask for what you need. You are the only one that can do that. You are the one that needs to intervene when you think it's necessary. And again, one of those decisions that we make, right? Do we need to intervene? Do we not? If we do, how are we doing it? Are we staying professional? Are we doing it to support the flow of communication, as we talked about a little bit earlier as well? Applying your ethical principles and supporting communicative autonomy, that's really what we base all of our decisions on, right? Are we upholding, are we supporting that communicative autonomy? And if we are we doing that in a way that is professional and that follows our code of ethics as interpreters, right? So just all of these things, as you'll see, they're so interwoven, and they are, one thing affects the next, and that's the nature of our work, right? Being transparent and impartial whenever you do have to intervene, encouraging the participants to speak to one another, even if they still keep saying, interpreter, tell her this, interpreter, tell them that, right? After you've redirected a couple of times, the only way you can at that point keep addressing it is by modeling that behavior, right? By just keeping your interpretation in first person. Someday that person, it'll sink in and they'll get it, hopefully one of these days, right? But inevitably, you're still going to have someone along your day that says, interpreter, tell him this or tell her that. And just you redirecting them when you can, but knowing that some people just don't get it. So when you do have to step in, keeping your transparency, keeping yourself impartial, making sure that it's not your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts on what the decision they're making might be, right? Keeping all of that to ourselves as interpreters. Not that we don't have those thoughts or feelings, but we just don't need to voice them, because that's not why we're there. We're there to interpret, we're there to uphold their communicative autonomy and the choices that the participants are each making. So that's kind of how I think we can best sum up this big, very heavy. I feel like this is one of the heaviest sections, one of the heaviest domains. So definitely a lot to talk about, but cut it out there.
Of the 4 domains, right? This is kind of the meat and potatoes of our work, because Sarah covered our opening and our closing, and then even just before, the other domains that Rocio was talking about. But this one's the meat and potatoes, where this is when our interpreters get tripped up the most, because this is when you have to balance that transparency and impartiality while also keeping your composure and managing communication and how it's happening. And this is the one where we see a lot of growth, and where we can fine tune some of those really important but smaller details on our work. Great job, Rocio.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's try and get it right the first time as I scroll.
Nope.
No? Oh my gosh. One of these days. All right.
Okay, so now we are going to pivot to talk about participant education and communication. So this is you instructing the participants about how to best work with interpreters. And when this is done well, it will not feel like instructions, right? They're going to just naturally understand and naturally just start doing the behavior that you're providing for them. And this will not only help you in this session, this will help all your fellow interpreters in the future, because if we can educate during those sessions and get our participants to work well with interpreters, then they're going to continue to do that with other interpreters in the future, right? So I think that's a really cool thing to keep in mind, that it's not just about, keeping your frustration down or making it smooth for you. It's about keeping it smooth for all of us in the future, or if you work with that person again in the future. So when you're giving those instructions, think about what's important to you. This is going to differ slightly for interpreter to interpreter, but if you are a spoken language interpreter, let's say, and it's really important to you that the participants pause in this session because you know going into it, this is a complex topic. Maybe you're new to remote, you're used to being on site where you can switch to simultaneous, and you really need those people to pause. So that's going to be part of the instructions, and that will be part of what you emphasize to them. Let's say I am an ASL interpreter like Danielle. It's not important to me that they pause, right? They can just keep talking. And maybe you get participants who are used to working with spoken language interpreters, and then you have to jump in and kind of kindly remind them that, you know, for ASL, you don't need to pause for me, just keep going and I will just interpret right along with you. So those are some examples of how it could differ. But I think it's always important to give reasons when you're giving those instructions. Do this very briefly, succinctly, because we don't want to get too hung up on this and frustrate anyone, but give reasons. Say, you know, in order to accurately interpret your message, I need you to interpret for, or I need you to repeat for the interpreter, please. So just a brief reason like that. Always bring it back to communicative autonomy, giving those folks the right to speak the way they want to speak. You know, you may have to step in so that the one participant allows the other participant to finish their thought, and then you can interpret that and kind of reestablish that flow and order. Another part of this subdomain is when you're speaking in third person to participants that you use professional and culturally appropriate language, right? So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to differ from language to language, but you have to keep that professional tone. And remember, especially if you're only working over the phone, I mean, that really can come through your voice, that professional tone. They say that even if you smile, even if they can't see you, you can hear that in your voice. So keep that professional tone whenever you're intervening, and then go right back to that interpreter reflecting the register style and tone along with the speaker once you're back to that. So just some examples here, and I'm going to hand it back to Danielle to bring it all together.
So before I move on, we have all of these 4 domains and those subdomains, and that was a 15 to 20 minute summation of all the things that you should be considering as you are evaluating your work, reflecting on your work. All of this will actually be expounded on and do a deep dive into it in a textbook that I have the absolute pleasure of co-authoring with several phenomenal people in this field. And Sarah's actually one of them. Rocio is actually helping with this chapter that's dedicated to self-evaluation and this tool. And that's coming out this summer, and it's called the Remote Interpreter, and it's an international textbook. We've written it for an audience that doesn't matter your language pair, your location. We cover OPI, VRI, RSI is in there, and it really is coming at a time. It was actually started writing it before the pandemic, and then the pandemic, of course, has really impacted and shaped and shifted the way interpreters are working, where now remote is almost a part of every interpreter's portfolio. So that's coming out in summer of this year, 2022. So this tool will have lots more language and guidance, but this is just the primer. So please keep an eye out on it. Stay in touch with CCC. They are the fabulous publisher. Marjorie is our editor and publisher, and she has been a saint working with us and almost like herding cats at this point. But that book is coming out this summer, where you have a lot more detail. It will go into the 3-2-1. So what does it look like when you perform this domain or this subdomain well, or not so well, or really we need to take a step back and reevaluate. But from here, what you see is just these different domains to evaluate your work, to guide yourself going through these conversations. And then, as you'll see in a few minutes, guiding you through peer support on what to talk about. And so instead of just saying, well, how did it feel? You can go, when you look at your session engagement and technology management, how did you do with your remains completely engaged and focused? You can actually give tangible, targeted feedback and reflection in all of these areas. So before I'm doing it again, going the wrong way. Before we get into it, it's got to be the mouse, I'm sure. Before we model the peer support, This is very text heavy. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, it's more text heavy than I would like to see in a webinar. However, I'm anticipating either several of you doing screenshots right now. I promise this is getting sent out in 24 hours, but I wanted this to kind of be your guide on what is the self-evaluation tool and peer support? Like, what's the purpose of it? You'll see in the center, it's progress. Progress, not perfection. We are a practice profession. We are not a perfect profession. And the goal of all of our sessions is communicative autonomy. So everyone has said what they want, how they want, when they want, and they can go on their merry way, whether they liked the outcome or not. Every decision you made upheld their communicative autonomy and they can get what they need done. And so we're always progressing. So we want to self-evaluate ourselves. And remember that not every session will have all of those domains you just covered. There will not be an opportunity every time to educate a participant. And that's okay, because maybe the interpreter before you did all the educating and they learned. And Rocio was talking about that. Think about the next interpreter. Sarah said that. Think about the next interpreter. Truly, think about the next interpreter. Are they going to do the same thing you did? Are they going to do the same thing you did with communicative autonomy in mind? Think about that. So the next interpreter that comes after you maybe has an easier job when it comes to some of those domains. Ask yourself questions, and these will be modeled in the peer support. What went well? Not what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Right? It's a practice profession. Your interpretation will never be perfect. There will always be another way you could have done it, maybe even slightly different or slightly better, and that's okay. But did you get as close to as perfect as possible? Because there's always room to improve because we are a practice profession. What challenges do you face? Do you notice progress from the last session to this session? And what other tools or support do you need? Do you need to attend more webinars like this? Do you need to get a mentor? Do you need to buy a textbook in summer of 2022 to help you improve your skills as a remote interpreter? What do you need? Who do you need to talk to? Set goals for yourself. What are those goals that you want? And that should come from the results of your self-evaluation. It shouldn't be, yeah, I think I want to work on this. Use the tool to evaluate your performance and find areas of opportunity and growth, and then work towards them and track that progress. You can have a goal and think, oh, I'm doing well in it. But if you aren't tracking the progress to really reveal how you're doing, it's just a goal with no action. And Rocio mentioned this before, find your village. Being remote is not an excuse. I have very, very, very dear friends in my life. I live close to none of them. And I met them virtually. I have met Rocio. I have known her for 7 years now. We've met in real life twice. I have known Sarah for 2 years. I have met her in person never. And I have other friends who live across the country and people that I hold near and dear to my heart, especially as professional peers. I have never met in person. So remote's not a barrier. We have smartphones, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, FaceTime. You can video call on Instagram now, for heaven's sakes. So there's so many ways to find a village, and I see it happening here in the chat, people exchanging emails and how can we create a group. You have a village, you have an outlet, build your village so you can be a part of someone's success and growth, and someone can be a part of your success and growth.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you noticed that in the chat, people are building their village as we speak. So
it's wonderful.
It's great.
LinkedIn is great to find additional resources. I'm active on LinkedIn. I say all the time, if you're a professional interpreter, you better be on LinkedIn, because that's where you can find a network and you can find resources. Your peer support will guide each other. It helps you dig into the work. It's not about, Rocio, you did a bad job. It's let's talk about the work as a tangible product and what can we do together to make it better. And so helping with a village and giving support is a huge part of that. And progress, right? Celebrate the things that you're doing well in and celebrate when you uphold communicative autonomy. Don't beat yourself up when maybe you missed the mark that day and instead of getting a 3, you got a 2 or a 1 in that area. Go, all right, I have work to do, and then do the work, right? We can't just practicing our craft in a call or in a session or in an appointment. We have to practice intentionally outside of that and talk about the work outside of that. Again, we are practice professionals. We like to say, well, we're just as important as needing a doctor in the room or a lawyer or a teacher. Awesome. They practice too. They work on their craft. We have to do the same thing. And this tool is meant to give you a tangible thing to go, how do I look at my work? And then what we'll talk about next is how you talk about the work and how you ask yourself questions, whether you're asking them to yourself as you coach yourself, or you're working with other people, because we all know words have power and they can really impact how you feel about yourself or how someone feels about themselves. And so we want to be careful how we ask questions. And so that's this part where we go from self-evaluation to that peer support. And Rocio and Sarah are going to model what that looks like and how we can really be a partner to someone. There's been plenty of discussion about the sandwich method, where I'll tell you something good you did, something not so good, and then something you did good. And it's like, well, I'm not listening to the first and last thing. As someone who is a words of affirmation, I need feedback, but I want positive feedback. If I know you're going to take that approach with me, I'm not listening to the beginning. I'm only going to listen to the middle part, the negative part. So we're going to shift how we talk about the work, shift the questions we ask to really get people to open up and evaluate their performance. Okay, I'm going to go. I did it right the first time. I changed the slide. Right on time.
Nice.
Small victories. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do a peer support in action. So what we're going to do is use this tool to guide a scenario, and we're going to set the stage and kind of jump into it, where we have a scenario where Sarah is our fabulous interpreter, and she just completed a OPI over the phone interpreting session. And it was between a utility customer, an electric utility customer, and the utility company. The utility customer was really emotional because she's laid on a bill. They're threatening to turn off her services, and the customer just doesn't understand the system. Let's say she's new to the United States. Let's say that's where this is happening. New to the United States, doesn't quite understand how things work here. And now she's being threatened with an overdue bill, and they're going to turn her services off. So she's very heightened and alert and emotional. And you have a utility company employee who very much on the other hand is like, what's going on? I don't have time for this. Pay your bill. I want to turn off your services if you don't. And I'm working with interpreter. Everything's taking too long. And Sarah, as the interpreter, she will walk out of that session knowing she struggled to manage the flow of communication. Some new vocabulary was introduced, including sliding fee scale. So she knows that there's some things she wants to work on. And so she picks up the phone and she calls her peer, her support, Rocio, and Rocio is going to guide her through this self-evaluation and how to really reflect on the work and think about areas that went well. What might she do differently next time? Not what would you do where that was bad, what challenges she may have faced, and any additional tools or support. And she's going to ask those questions and maybe in that way, in different ways, but really guide Sarah on that self-evaluation. So as they go, I will play narrator and I'll push pause on them and just kind of call out what they did so that you can really see that there's some intentional, thoughtful word choice and practice happening here to avoid just telling Sarah what to do or what to do differently next time, but to really guide Sarah through self-reflection and evaluation. Okay. So I think, as we said in our TCCI or TCII trainer of trainers training, we'll wave the magic wand and now action. Okay.
Oh man, that was a tough call.
Oh, really? What happened? What went well? What was going on?
Well, I think the start of it went well. Maybe after that, everything kind of is a blur, but the introduction was fine. It was smooth. I came on, did it with both people. They seemed patient. They seemed willing. So I felt like this is going to go great. It's going to go smooth. But from there, I don't think things went as well as they could have. It kind of got out of my control.
It got out of your control. What do you think made it get out of your control?
Well, they were so the rep calling the customer, emotions were high. You could tell the rep was frustrated. So I did my best to match that with my interpretation. But they were taking turns out of order. They started talking over each other because emotions were so high. Mm-hmm. And I think I need to work on being authoritative in my voice when I intervene so I can control that better, because the flow was just off.
Yeah. And how did you intervene?
So I stepped in, I said, interpreter speaking, I need to remind you, and they just kind of ignored me. They just kept talking over me.
Yeah. So it definitely sounds like it was definitely a difficult session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When they just ignored you, did you do anything else? Like, did you follow up at all?
Eventually they stopped because I think they saw that they weren't communicating with each other, right? So they needed the interpreter to be able to understand, but it was a little out of control. I think I may have even missed some statements that I didn't hear because they were talking at the same time, but eventually it came back and it kind of got back on track from there.
Yeah.
And this is Danielle. I'm going to push pause real quick. Just want to call one thing to attention. Do you see how Rocio has only asked questions? Right? She's not given her any guidance. She's not told her what she should have done or done differently. She's validated her feelings. Yeah, that sounds like it was difficult. And she's validated the feeling and then asked additional follow-up questions. Okay, go ahead.
Now I lost my place.
Come on.
So you said that you forgot. You said that you mentioned that there were some things that you think you might have left out in your interpretation.
Yeah, I think just things I missed from when they were talking at the same time, but I'm not really sure because they didn't want to repeat after that. But then there were some challenges with terminology too, some new terminology I wasn't super familiar with. And because I'm remote and they were located in a different state, the way they talk about their billing system is a little different. And that was hard for me too.
Yeah, there's always something. I feel like they always throw something in there, right? There's always something new. Did you take any notes about any of that new stuff?
Yeah, I took some notes. I know where the call happened. It was out in California. So I'm going to do some Googling later and kind of figure that out.
Yeah, sometimes I do think that I'll look something up. If I hear like a grocery store name that I'm not familiar with, that's new, that might be different. Because, there's different grocery chains. They have different names in different parts of the country, right? So we might kind of look it up even afterwards, just so the next time you kind of already have it in the back of your head, what they're actually trying to say, even if it doesn't sound quite right. How do you think your tone was throughout it though? Do you think you were still reflecting their emotions, or you think it got the best of you?
I think I did okay with that. It was more when I was intervening that I think it came through that maybe I was a little frustrated and a little nervous about the taking turns out of order. I think I didn't, like I said, I think I need to work on sounding more authoritative.
You want to practice it? Do you want to?
Yeah, that would actually be great.
That'd be right. All right. So pretend I'm just cutting you off and talking over you.
Okay. All right. All right, so interpreter speaking, I'm sorry, in order to be accurate, I need you to take turns, please, and I need to interpret the full statement before you jump in.
Perfect.
How was
Did
that?
The first thing that caught my eye, or caught my ear, I should say, was the I'm sorry, right? Because you have to get rid of that passive, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize.
That's so
whatever
true.
you need, remember, right? What we need as interpreters, nobody else is going to give it to us. You're not asking for anything out of the realm of what you need to do your work. You didn't do anything wrong. So immediately, that was maybe one of the things that might contribute to why they just keep talking over you, if you notice that happen again.
Yeah, so true. That's my default too, that I'm sorry. I have to like slap myself on the wrist every time I say that.
You're gonna have to do one of those rubber bands and snap it. But yeah, I thought the rest of it sounded great. You were great at, saying that you were stepping in, you told them what you needed, and you gave them a quick why. So hopefully just even that small tweak, maybe that'll help.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thanks for talking through that with me, Rocio.
Yeah, of course.
If you're ever feeling angry on a certain day, we can role play again, and then I can practice with angry customers, angry callers.
Awesome. Thank you for the role play, ladies. So one thing I want to call out there that she just did too, she continued her line of questioning. She continued her validation without letting her overindulge in how frustrated she was. And then she gave her an option to practice what you want to actually have it sound like, right? So we can hear, oh, next time, maybe you should try this, or next time, consider this. But she let her put it into action. And then that one piece, Rocio and I have done a lot of training together. And that is one thing that the I'm sorry piece, right? We don't apologize for our work, but look what happened in that role play. She was able to get out of Sarah that's a quick, tangible change and adjustment to actually give her more confidence in how she sounds. But these coaching and self-evaluation sessions and these peer sessions, take time. They take conversation and dialogue. And so you, as someone who is going to be supporting an interpreter, having some of these passive questions in here, let me get it. Nope, wrong way. Some of these passive questions. What went well? What might you do differently next time? What challenges did you face? Additional tools and support. Having some of those questions available to help you if you get stuck, but then also helping your peer go down this rabbit hole to a certain extent of thinking about the work and revealing within themselves what it is. We're all interpreters and we all work. If you're a professional interpreter, you know, generally speaking, what you should do and probably what you shouldn't do. And sometimes you just need someone to guide you to that point. You don't necessarily need someone to tell you what to do differently. You just need them to help you get there and go, oh, that's right. I remember that. And let's practice that. So we could have done this probably for hours and hours and hours because there's so many scenarios and things we could do to model. But practice this with yourself. If you're going to use gentle language with other people, use gentle language with yourself. Right? Not, oh, what did I do wrong? I'm such a terrible interpreter. You would never say that to another person, another interpreter. You would be nice and gentle with them. So be nice and gentle with yourself and use this tool to guide yourself through your evaluation, to guide the conversation. You saw in the dialogue that Rocio and Sarah had, that interventions and support and transparency and attitude, all those key words came out in the coaching and the peer support session. And the longer that session would go, the more frequently you're going to hear these other elements come up. And these are areas too where you can find a quick win. Let's say the call or the session as an interpreter was pretty tough and rough, and it wasn't your best performance. There are easy wins in here that you can find. Your opening and your closing to ground yourself in the, I'm still a good interpreter. One bad session does not define who I am. And I have several domains and subdomains where I can go, I'm still a good interpreter. I just had a bad session. And then you can be very targeted in the other areas of growth. So fabulous. So I'm keeping an eye on our clock. We have just a few more minutes left. We have this slide up here. Self-evaluation and peer support is a journey. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah because I know especially these first two are really important for her to speak to.
Yes. So as we've been saying this whole time, I'm just going to reiterate it, but it does start with you. So this is a practice profession. You have to take the initiative and, you know, now we've given you this tool so you can take that. We've done some of the first steps, but you need to reflect on your own practice, right? I think we've all been guilty of, like Danielle said, just beating ourselves up and saying, oh, I'm just a bad interpreter, because whether you've been doing this for years or whether you're new, those sessions are going to happen. But it's important that we push through that and we keep practicing and we keep reflecting and we grow from it. So the second point on the path, spend time with the self-evaluation tool. I'm always amazed. I've been in quality assurance for interpreters now for about 6 years. And I'm always amazed working with tools similar to the one we've presented today, that when I go back to the language and reread it, something new will stick out to me. Even if I feel like I have it memorized, you can still keep it fresh. And when you are looking at that session, whether it's your own or a peer's, and then you read that language, you can really find how it applies and how something might stick out to you, and look for those words: effectively, consistently, engaged. You know, try to highlight that in your own view of your performance after the fact. Now I'm going to hand it off to Rocio, I believe, to talk about the next steps.
Yeah, so we're talking about skill development happens when we practice, right? If you don't use it, you lose it, as the saying goes. It's the same thing with all of these skills that we're talking about. Tracking your progress, have a written journal, an electronic journal. There's so many options nowadays, right? Write down those questions, write down your answers, put your dates there. So, you know, on this day, this is what happened. And then you can track your own progress. And if you're focused on one specific part of the domain, one specific thing you want to tackle, you can keep track of that progress. So you're not like trying to say, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, but you never hop on the scale. Then how do you know if you've lost 40 instead, right? Track your progress, keep those notes. And also, if you have any questions, you can jot them down and say, next time I talk to Sarah or to whomever, I'll ask them, I'll see what they think about it. What would they have done, right? Also a good place to write down those questions. And that way you can get someone else's opinion.
Yeah, you take those questions to the village, right? And I've seen it already. So I have my phone out And LinkedIn is blowing up with requests and comments on our posts about this. So that's great. We are now a part of your village. So track your progress and take it to the village. You can learn from each other. The newest interpreter and the most experienced interpreter can learn something from each other when you use this tool as your guiding light, as your foundation for your conversation, because it will help you ask each other questions, and then you will learn. Teachers learn from students, students learn from teachers. And remember, we're not trying to be perfect. We don't want anyone to be the perfect interpreter. Language is messy, humans are messier. So there's no possible way for communication to be going through you in a perfect interpretation, but you can do your absolute best, considering all the elements of the tool, considering communicative autonomy, and deliver the best product interpretation possible, knowing you could always do better. So I know we did not give the full 15. So Marge, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you really quick so we can answer some of these questions.
Yes,
sorry.
3,000 questions.
There's so much to talk about. It's just too much.
Well, that's exciting, right? Here's the interesting thing. We do have questions about the self-evaluation tool, but I've never seen so many questions that were for the presenters that were just about interpreting what do I do in this situation or that situation. And dear three presenters, I'm sure it speaks to the sense of authority that you've exuded, and people just want to know what you would do. By the way, someone also said, Sarah, it was the perfect storm call. And someone remarked about this giving of feedback, excellent tone among peers, non-judgmental and supportive above all, which is so true. One question about this, specifically about self-evaluation, which is the topic of this webinar, is how does and this throw it out to any or all of you, how does confidentiality play into a peer self-evaluation?
Well, I think it's, you leave all that personally identifying information out, right? I don't have to tell you anyone's name, where they live, we don't need to share any of that to be able to talk about what happened during the call.
And I think trust that the details that they've shared with you, I've already changed them. So like, trust that if she said California, she probably meant Florida or Alaska or wherever. So everyone just has to assume we're all changing details, and you're talking about the tangible decisions you made. This is what happened. I'm not worried about what happened so much as I'm worried about how I responded and how can I do it better next time.
Got it. Thank you. Someone is asking, Sarah, can you please repeat your authoritative intervention statement?
I'm going to do it without the I'm sorry this time, since that was Rocio's feedback for me. So
go for it.
Interpreter speaking, can you please speak one at a time so I may finish the interpretation of one participant before you jump in? Thank you.
So in the
training, may not have been verbatim.
It was perfect. In the trainings Rocio and I have given, we come across so many people who go, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And it drives me crazy. No doctor, no teacher, no lawyer, no utility service worker has ever said, I'm sorry, right? If they have, please record it and call me and share that with me, because I would love to hear it.
So, and I've also, just to add to that, I've heard interpreters ask permission to intervene before, which I always tell them, you do not have to ask permission, just go for it. You're the interpreter.
We don't ask permission to do our job because no one else is asking permission to do their job. They're just doing it. And we don't say, I'm sorry. However, if you feel the need to say, I'm sorry, there's a fancy one, right? This is the interpreter speaking, not I'm sorry, but this is the interpreter speaking. And what's the, Rocio, remind me, what is the fancy one?
You're the one that always loves that fancy one that I don't love it.
Oh my gosh, it's the fancy, but not I'm sorry, it's going to come to me. But there is a fancy one for you to say, but I'm sorry.
I heard you say it so many times.
I know. This is what happens. But don't say I'm sorry, right? This is the interpreter speaking in an effort to do my job, or for communication, or for whatever reason I need. But no, I'm sorry. No one's apologizing to do their job for you. You can't apologize. Don't need to apologize to do your job.
Great point.
No, excuse me. Excuse me is the same thing as I'm sorry. That's what I'm.
No.
Like it.
Take up space without apology, right? That's what we're here for.
Thank you. You're professionals. Someone is asking, for those of us that are tech dinosaurs, can you please suggest a few apps for tracking progress? Thank you. What do you say to that?
I have a notebook.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't have to be high tech for that. It's like a literal journal, a notebook you can write on. It does not have to be fancy.
I have a llama on a bicycle. Right?
You could do it on your calendar too. I mean, if you're trying to be digital, but you still don't want to do super high tech or learn a new app, I mean, you could put in to your calendar a recurring reminder to self-evaluate or to set up a peer feedback session with a mentor or a trusted colleague. So, and then you could put, you know, notes in that specific event in your calendar, or just use your notes app on your iPhone, or whatever the equivalent of other phones is. I use my notes app for everything.
Yep.
Like that. Thank you. What do you think about shadowing over the phone?
No, thank you.
Oh.
Because you need consent of everybody involved.
Yeah.
And we don't need to cloud the point of the communication between those folks. That there's enough content on YouTube. And I know there's some trainers out there who are making language neutral content that you can practice interpreting with and then use that. So for the effort of peer support, I would stay away from it, because I think there's a lot of hoops you need to jump through to get that, unless you're working for a larger organization that has their own internal programming that has already done all the heavy lifting of getting consent from everyone involved. But in a private individual practice, I think that's too distracting to the participants and the communication needs they have.
I will say, I'll agree with Danielle. If it's already set up and you're working for a larger organization and it's possible, it can be very helpful. I know starting as a remote interpreter back in my day, we had call centers before the pandemic. And so overhearing other interpreters was really helpful to me, to hear other people, how they scripted things, how they phrased things, how they intervened. And we were all, of course, under the same agreement with HIPAA compliance and all of that, and could just hear the one side of the conversation. So shadowing in that sense can be very helpful, just to give you inspiration of how you may script things differently in the future and bounce ideas. It starts those conversations.
Yep.
Yes, and someone actually asked, a peer listening to the interaction to do peer evaluation, would that be considered unethical? I know that we have listeners from many countries, or viewers from many countries, but in most cases, even in other countries, I fear that that would be considered illegal, not just unethical. Right. So it has to be a very, very structured process, as in a language company, if there is going to be any of that kind of listening involved. So last question. It has to have a half-minute answer. Please, can you also send the book or support you used for training? Danielle, that's your question.
Can I send the book I used to support for this?
I don't know what they mean. Perhaps they mean the book that you have promised for this summer that I'm not quite sure is coming out this summer. I hope so.
Yes, Marjorie. Yes. So I will say the tool that we developed here and the PowerPoint and everything is inspired by, between the three of us, if you count it consecutively, right? When you have attorneys who say, in our practice, we have over 100 years of practice, because they've counted everybody on top of each other, right? So we have lots of years of experience between spoken and sign language interpreters, and that have influenced this, and is definitely influencing the book. But a lot of the skills and protocols that are in that tool are from our experience and our observations, but are from a lot of it from the Community Interpreter International, from these training programs that are out there that have really given interpreters and trainers the language and the words and the standards and best practices to evaluate. So as Rocio said at the beginning, this is a living and breathing tool, because the industry is ever evolving. How we do our work is ever evolving. And so this tool will change, not dramatically, but it'll evolve, but it will be in full form and fully expounded on in the textbook that is coming out this summer.
We're desperately hoping this summer. We're desperately hoping this summer.
Yes.
Stay tuned. We will make sure that everybody viewing this is informed about progress. Thank you so much to our illustrious presenters. That was incredibly deep and complex, presented quickly and clearly, and with such practical impact, I think, for everybody, and peer-to-peer, just as the way you're advising us to use the tool, also peer-to-peer. I really, really thank you to see the enormous interest that this was stimulated, to know that this is going to be shared around the world. I hope you take pride in that, ladies. I hope you float on your success for the rest of the day, knowing all our gratefulness to you, including tons and tons of grateful comments in chat and even in Q&A. We look forward to staying in touch. Yes, everybody, you will get the link to this PowerPoint and to the actual recording of the webinar itself, that you can freely share the webinar link, because it will be always on our webpage. Thank you, everybody. Sorry we didn't have time for all the 3,000 questions.
Thank you. And find all of us on LinkedIn. We are part of your village. And Marjorie, I'm sorry, I know we're over time, so if people have to go, you have to go. But if you're a sign language interpreter, please reach out to your spoken language brothers and sisters. And if you're a spoken language interpreter, please reach out to your sign language interpreter brothers and sisters. We're all in the same business, delivering the same service, interpreting, and we don't need to be siloed, and we can learn so much from each other. So please, I am the only sign language interpreter on this panel, and I can tell you both these women have been so influential in my practice as an interpreter and how I support spoken. And I would love to grow that village and be a part of your village. And so please, let's break those silos of sign does this and spoken does this, and actually work together to change the world. So that's my last plug. I couldn't help myself.
It was a beautiful message, Danielle, and I really thank you for it.